Hi guys, I'm Kweku.
I'm Onyinye.
I'm Titi.
And I'm Zainab.
And together we are making a podcast based on our field trip experience in the UN headquarters in New York. And the question we are addressing here is, does the United Nations decision-making system need reforms? And we are taking it from the United Nations Security Council's point of view. So the United Nations Security Council is the most powerful body of the United Nations. Its primary responsibility is the maintenance of international peace and security, and now strengthened by David Malone. The Council initially viewed its role as preventing a third world war. Now, whether the UN has been successful in achieving this goal? Arguably, yes. Because since its creation in 1946, there hasn't been any world war, although conflicts are still ongoing, where the Council cannot reach a consensus in maintaining international peace, which is its main goal. Perhaps this is the reason why the Security Council has been subject to criticism in terms of how decisions are made. And during our visit to the UN, we asked our fellow delegates, does the United Nations decision-making system need reforms? Here are their responses and our analysis.
Initially, I would say no. I don't think the United Nations needs a reform just because of its success and collaboration with so many different countries and such a variety of ideas being able to come together. But I do think that there are certain areas that can be changed or better improved, such as how it's funded. Some programs are funded. I know the United States funds a majority of the programs that are.
From this interview, the delegate has mentioned two salient points. Firstly, she believes that the United Nations Security Council might not need reform because it has recorded successes in form of member state collaborations. These collaborations have been made possible through the contribution of member states. The major contribution has been made by the United States of America in form of about 22%. These humanitarian and developmental assistance have been made possible with collaboration. Although America has the most collaboration of 22%, it is actually wise to recognize other states who have made good contributions as well. Countries like Germany with about 7.14% and Japan with about 10.83%. We believe that if these countries are equally encouraged and appreciated, they would want to contribute more. Let's listen to the next interview.
What I view in regards to the UN decision-making process, I believe that there do need to be a more implementation in regards to the decision-making of other member states, because it is difficult for the majority, and when I say the majority, I really mean the majority, because when you look at the P5, for example, and how their decision-making needs to be implemented for the UN decision-making process, it prevents a lot of the opinions from other member states to not be accepted and to not be heard because of the current decision-making process that is in place. So therefore, I do think that there needs to be reforms in regards to that decision-making process of the UN.
The Security Council comprises 5 permanent members, the so-called P5, as we heard in the video, or veto powers. Now, this is where the debate or the criticism occurs in regards to how decisions are made within the Security Council. And as we heard in the interview, one of the criticisms is that it prevents opinion of other member states from being heard. Now, let's have a closer look at this. Well, any one of the P5 can veto a resolution and no action will be taken, meaning decision concerning 193 member states depends on these 5 states, or effectively one member state, to veto and hinder any action, such as the resolution on Syria, which had failed as admitted by the UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon. Now, this is what needs to be taken into consideration. The global power balance has shifted dramatically since 1945, which is the creation of the United Nations. And Huntington forecasted in his article, Clash of Civilization, a people's culture and religion will be the primary source of conflict. This is the transformation that needs to be implemented within the Security Council by including states in regions prone to conflict for effective representations. As experienced during our trip, US universities dominated the representation of the delegates. The question whether the UN voting system needs to be transformed is not in dispute, but how it should be done is rather unclear. Now let's take a look at our next interview.
And I think that the United Nations decision-making process indeed does need reforms because it excludes a lot of developing countries and it relies heavily, very much so, on developed countries. Also, there's a lot of overlap in things that they try to do, and if that's streamlined, we believe that the world will be a lot better place and it'll be more effective and it'll be more efficient.
In her opinion,
Include more developing countries in their decision-making processes. Take into account their specific plights and what they can do to help them, which is the major issue that's not being addressed right now.
the gist from the interview, she suggests that more representation of developing countries to the P5 member council would serve as an effective form of reforms for the United Nations. However, in contrast to these arguments, the President of the General Assembly noted during the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, which was held in 2015, as an unquestionable form of reform, suggesting that the issue has been an ongoing one since the 2005 summit and has reached no consensus because developing countries cannot afford to contribute half of their net gross income to the United Nations as how the P5 Council members are doing to date. In my opinion, the need for change or adding more members to the United Nations Security Council is a vague reason because the Council is still very credible and efficient in decision making concerning security and international development issues. Another reason is that these developing countries are not as efficient in contributions as the P5 members. However, it is pertinent to note that including developing countries might pose a threat to the decision-making system of the Council, making it less effective. And just like how we experienced on our field trip in the General Assembly, another point of view from our delegates is
I think it needs reform in regards to how countries are represented within the UN and how some countries in different committees can have more votes or importance than others, especially in the IMF, where the US has larger votes than the others, and also reform in terms of how how decisions in the General Assembly are not binding, but then in the Security Council where there's only 5 countries that have veto rights, that is binding, so it's kind of arbitrary.
From this video, the delegate's response to the question asked is, when it comes to veto power and how binding decisions made are, the P5 are unrestrained, mentioning further that although all member states are represented in the General Assembly, decisions made are not binding, but only mandatory, which brings in the issue of inclusion. Unlike the General Assembly, not all member states are included in the decision-making process of the Security Council, which makes the GA political power lesser than that of the Security Council. Although the General Assembly can discuss anything and many things, but these are only suggested recommendations, which are not binding. The decision-making process of the General Assembly takes longer than that of the Security Council, which we experienced from the NMUN trip. Voting on resolutions and working papers took days and was less effective. The Security Council is in charge of making decisions that concerns acts endangering international peace and security, even on such occasions where the veto power cannot agree on issues like putting on a stop to mass atrocity and upholding its primary responsibility, which is maintaining international peace, like in the case of Syria. The GA should call for Resolution 377, Uniting for Peace, to be put in place, like it did during the Korean War, when the Soviet Union vetoes stopped the United Nations from maintaining peace and security in Korea.
To conclude, it's been argued on one hand that expanding the United Nations Security Council veto to more countries like Germany, Brazil, and Nigeria would reduce United Nations effectiveness, and on the other hand, the veto power cannot be abolished. Our suggestion of reform is that, The General Assembly should be given the power to overrule the Security Council through a majority vote where the United Nations Security Council fails to exercise its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace. Thank you.